agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love.
Welcome to The Politics Guys. I'm Trey Orndorff, a political scientist at Oklahoma Christian University, and I'm joined by Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science. Mike, welcome to the show.
It's always great to do the show with you, Trey. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've had a chance to do a few more shows together, which I think that listeners like. And matter of fact, there's one listener in particular I'd like to reach out to. He is a new Patreon supporter, and his name is Anthony. So Anthony, thank you so much for being a supporter of The Politics Guys. You make this place happen. And you can be like Anthony too by heading to Patreon right now, .com/politicsguys if you want to become a supporter of the show and get things like the ad-free version of this show. But we've got things to get to, Mike. Oh my, there's so many things. And we thought we were going to start because this, I think, has really been the biggest issue, has been what's been happening in the House and the Senate over funding. This week, the House finally passed the Senate amended version of the budget, ending a brief partial government shutdown that began on January 30 when the Senate removed the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, from that package. Now, this gave the House and the Senate longer to negotiate on what to do over border enforcement. So right now, DHS is operating under its 2-week continuing resolution, which I think everybody is expects to expire at the end of next week. Now, as of this weekend, both parties are expecting just what I said, that DHS funding is going to lapse. Why? Here's what's going on. Democrats have come out for restrictions on immigration and custom enforcement, or ICE, and on Custom and Border Patrol, or CBP. Now, on Wednesday this week, Democratic leadership unveiled a formal 10-point plan to, quote, rein in ICE, end quote. It includes a number of items such as no masks requiring ID for officers, more targeted enforcement, and body cameras and body camera data management. Republicans have called the proposed reforms, quote, a ridiculous Christmas list of restrictions on immigration and customs enforcement, end quote. Now, also, along with that, Senate Majority Lead John Thune told the Senate that he doesn't see a deal coming together. As he put it, quote, we've got a now 1 week and 1 day time frame in which to do this, which is entirely unrealistic. And a Democratic Party in both the House and the Senate, which seems a lot less interested in getting a solution to this than they do in having a political issue, end quote. Now, it does not appear right now that Republicans can get the votes necessary to pass the bill in the Senate. And it also doesn't appear that Republicans are going to be willing to bypass that filibuster process, which is going to hold the bill up in the Senate. So one proposal that was floated this week by centrists in both parties was to simply pass funding measures for the TSA, for FEMA, for the Coast Guard, the other agencies that aren't involved in Trump's immigration enforcement operations. But even senators like Susan Collins has argued that that's just a logistical impossibility because of the pre-existing funding arrangement. Wow. So here we are, Mike. I don't think we're going to get this funded by Friday. So what happens next?
I guess what happens next is probably best case scenario, another CR on this. And, I think, as you pointed out in the open, that nobody really thought that essentially 10 days to deal with those list of 10 demands from Jeffries and Schumer were going to be nearly enough. But it's a way I think that deadline is really to focus everyone and sort of get things going as quickly as possible, kind of expedite the process. And when I look at those demands, it seems to me that there are some things that are plausible. There are some things that are possible. And yeah, there are a few things that are, I don't know if I'd call them ridiculous Christmas list, but I think they're a little bit out there, essentially. But honestly, when I look at that list in whole, it seems to me, for the most part, that those are, by and large, reasonable asks.
Yeah. I think we can be specific about it, Mike. I think taking the masks off would be the absolute, not in a meaningful way, but I think it'd be a huge symbolic win to have ICE in standardized uniforms minus masks. I think that would be huge. And I think that seems like something that should be an easy get together. What do you think about that?
weirdly completely disagree with you on that one, Trey. I think that's
Really?
almost certainly not going to happen. And I think there's a really good reason for it, because I think that ICE agents do have a legitimate concern about being doxxed and identified and having their personal safety. I don't like it. I don't like having masked agents, but we're living in a world where, I mean, ICE is, regardless of what you think about them, ICE agents, are at risk in that sense in their personal lives. And I think of all the demands, that's one of the ones that's least likely to be met because of what I see as, unfortunately, not crazy, reasonable personal safety concerns for law enforcement. And I think ICE would see that as the administration throwing them under their safety under the bus for the sake of an agreement. I think that is highly unlikely to happen. And again, while I don't like the idea of law enforcement being masked, I think a compromise is maybe identified, but I can understand if I were an ICE agent, I would be really reluctant to show my face, given what we know is going on.
I mean, would you be willing to have local police masked because they're worried about their safety in communities?
That's very different. It's very different because ICE is vilified in the way that, say, the Minneapolis police aren't. ICE is doing something that is incredibly unpopular to segments of the community, and so I think it's an entirely different situation.
So because of the targeted nature of it, they have a right to not be known who they are. I mean, how then are you supposed to hold any particular law enforcement? I agree with you to an extent, right? That that we need to protect police officers, we need to protect law enforcement agents, but simultaneously, I didn't think we're going to have quite this much disagreement. It seems difficult for me to be on board with the idea that suggests that the concerns of government agents outweigh the legitimate right of the citizenry to understand who's approaching and dealing with them. How are you supposed to identify? I mean, one of the reasons that I know during a traffic stop that I'm supposed to pull over and deal with this person as somebody else is because, as a minimum, I recognize their uniform, I recognize their vehicle, and I can at least ask for something that resembles an identification of who they are. How do we get to there if we can't have even basic things, like if we're so worried about their safety on that front?
I don't think we can. I mean, but the only other option is for the Trump administration to say, you know what, we're just going to pull out of Minneapolis, and that's not going to happen. And so we have to deal with the reality on the ground and not your, libertarian freedom utopia kind of world, Trey. And the fact of the matter is ICE agents do have legitimate concerns, and there are some crappy ICE agents for certain. There are ICE agents who are routinely violating laws. I mean, there was a Republican judge this week who said that in the month of January alone, ICE has likely violated more court orders than some government agencies have in their entire existence. And that's a very real thing, but we have to be realistic about what's possible here. And so
by possible, you mean working with the Trump administration?
Yeah, and what's possible is certainly having some sort of identification, institutional identification. I think that's reasonable. Body cams, and that's something that the Trump administration is conceding already. That, I think, is reasonable. I think real accountability is certainly reasonable, more than reasonable. I think that should be an absolute red line for Democrats, but they're not going to get. What
about standardized uniforms? Like, so
standardized uniforms, I think, is reasonable as well too. Sure, but the unmasking, like I said, because on the personal safety thing, and I just think that's not going to happen. And there are bigger concerns, I think, than that really need to be addressed.
In other words, those other items about the way they're targeting. But do you think that's any more likely? I mean, the Trump administration is clearly targeting specific locations on the basis of how he feels about these elections and where he thinks Democrats are doing bad things. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a Democrat. I live in red land, right? But be that as it may, it seems... if we take your logic to its end, it seems to me to suggest that there's not a lot you can really expect from Trump. Why is Trump going to want to give up on those other items? Why wouldn't they all be red lines for him?
because Trump really does not want to get the Republicans blown out in the midterm elections, and he is sensitive to public perception in a way that I think sometimes anti-Trump folks don't really appreciate. He doesn't want to be seen as this horrific monster who is getting Americans killed, so that matters to him. He's not this unfeeling monster the way a lot on the left want to portray him.
Fair.
And so that stuff does matter at some level to him. And there are things he immediately conceded to, the body cams, right? And I think they're going to get ID display, some sort of ID display. I think some changes to use of force policy and training, though, of course, that's going to take time to implement, right? I think they could even possibly get something on limiting administrative warrants, some sort of clarifications maybe on profiling, detention standards, access to counsel, those sort of things. Those are kind of bedrock civil liberties kind of things that play poorly with the general public. Now, I think what they won't get is some of the wish list sort of things. Like, for instance, there's no way any administration would say, oh, yes, before we go into your city or your state, we will need your permission to do so. I think that's just that's completely not feasible, right? Consent of states, that sort of thing.
I will concede that. I agree with you. Continue.
I think also there's not going to be, they've asked for a lot of restrictions on enforcement locations, which they're not going to get. Basically, almost anywhere people gather, essentially. And they threw, again, but I think it's important to look at that list of 10 demands as an opening negotiating position. It's not, they don't expect to get that. So you open with a huge ask and then you work down from that. And so it seemed to me as an opening statement, I read that and I thought, that seems like a great place to start. As in general, I think it's mostly pretty reasonable, though they're not going to get nearly as much of it as they want in the end.
So the one that I thought was probably the most important, but then you used some language there, and I'm not sure if you intended to or not, Mike. I thought one of the biggest ones was to make sure that we had actual judicial as opposed to administrative warrants remain as the standard for entering into private property. But you seem to indicate there that you didn't think that was likely.
No way.
I would have put that higher on the list even than the masks, was because that is the historic tradition.
It's not going to happen. I mean, too many House Republicans have made it clear that they are not going to support that. Now, I think the strongest Republican argument for this position is essentially saying that, well, listen, we're already acting on final orders of removal, and those have been issued by a judge. Now, albeit an immigration judge. So I don't think this is a great argument, because the problem here is that immigration judges aren't Article III judges, meaning that they're appointed by the Attorney General. They can be removed by the administration, though it's not like a you're fired sort of thing. You have to go through kind of the standard civil service process. But the point being is that isn't any sort of independent check. Now, I understand the Republican argument saying, well, this isn't just some kangaroo court sort of rubber stamp sort of thing, but it's still way too close for me and way too close, I think, for a lot of Democrats. But it's really clear that, to me at least, that the best they can get is maybe some sort of narrowing of the circumstances under which they're moved. But honestly, at this point, I wouldn't be stunned if they don't even get that.
Look, I'm going to drop a little bit of a reality bomb on you, friend. Like, I hear what you're saying, and I appreciate your pragmatism, but let's be real. If we're really thinking about the midterm elections, and if I was getting hired to be the Democratic strategist, and I'm coming home with what you're suggesting I'm coming home with, I don't want to go into the midterms with that, because I've got to get some people really passionate to want to come out and vote for Democrats. And if the answer is that it looks like, once again, I have chickened my way out, because that's the narrative of Democrats. They're the the chickens. They're not the ones who are going to hold the grounds. They're the ones who are going to compromise. There's the ones who are going to fold. And doesn't this just play into that base level narrative that to vote, if you're really on the left, you might as well just give up if you're a Democrat, because you're already saying that Donald Trump has won. He's already got these things entrenched. Sucks to suck.
I think it sounds like you're the one in the liberal bubble at this point. I think you're reading the New Republic and the left-wing media too much at this point, Trey, because that's the argument from the base. But if Democrats followed the advice of the base, they wouldn't necessarily even win the House in the midterms. I think it's horrible advice. The idea that, well, the big problem, of course, is that we just haven't gone left on nearly enough things and haven't opposed. The whole idea of what the Democrats need to do is to be more anti-Trump is one of the stupidest ideas that the admittedly stupid Democratic Party, at least strategically, has had. It's been pretty clearly demonstrated that that is a bad idea, running against Trump. Democrats need to be for something, not against Donald Trump. This whole Antifa sort of thing, it plays well with the base, but it's not going to play nearly as well with the people who are going to be deciding these elections in very close, purplish sort of congressional districts. And so I think this is.
But are we talking about a midterm? Are we talking about a unique population of people who are going to be voting? Right. I don't necessarily disagree with the thrust of your argument there. But again, if you're making those kind of strategic arguments, don't you have to be thoughtful about primaries and midterms in a different way that you are in the year? So you can't be anti-Trump, but at the same time, if you come away from this negotiation with nothing.
Oh no, they'll get real concessions, because both sides have a reason to make some concessions at least, but I just don't think they're going to get nearly as much as they like. I mean, Homan said that they're pulling 700 agents from Minneapolis. Now, granted, if you look before that December surge, there were only around 150 ICE agents in Minneapolis, and at the pullback, there are still, I guess, around 2,000 or so. So I think it's really kind of an interesting issue for us to discuss, because you are such a civil libertarian on this issue. And I feel like I'm more of a pragmatist on this. I don't think in the end, I think we want the same things. We would like to see around 150 ICE agents in Minneapolis, or something like that. But I'm looking at the political realities of it here, and I think you're living in libertarian utopia world, which, hey, it's a great place to, visit, but maybe it's just not where we live. So
I guess my problem isn't to suggest, I think you make a fair critique when you say, look, you want to live in this case, I think libertarian land. I think we overlap a little bit here, right? Yeah. And maybe I am outflanking you to the left on this particular issue in some ways. But I will be honest, there's a point in which I don't want my pragmatism to come off as an as a moral reality,
Sure.
Right? And so I think one of the problems here that I have is that we're pushing up against some items that are close to, if not in that border zone of like, no, I can't negotiate on. And I think that's one of the things. I think one of the difference we're seeing here is that I think you're not quite hitting some of those lines for you, and maybe again because of my own libertarian background, we're hitting closer to some of those lines for me. I mean, maybe that's a fair assessment of where we sit here.
I guess, and I think we don't necessarily differ a lot on some of the moral issues here, I guess I'll call them, but I think also that Democrats need to be cognizant of the fact that if they don't somehow come to an agreement on DHS, well, then that means TSA loses funding. That means FEMA loses funding. That means the Coast Guard loses funding. So both sides have leverage, but both sides have vulnerabilities. And to me, by far, the overriding thing right now is the midterms, because if Democrats don't win the midterms and win significantly, that means that the Trump administration can run roughshod for the next 2 years after the midterms. And I think it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is focused like a laser on the midterms. We'll talk about this later, about the things he's doing or threatening to do to suppress Democrat turnout in the midterms. And to me, if you care about rule of law, the only way we're going to get any sort of pushback against Trump, aside from the Supreme Court, I hope, doing the right thing more often than not, is if there were actual Democratic control in the House to push back in a significant way against this lawless, thuggish administration.
Well, I think what we should maybe finish the story on is item. I think that there's going to be one particular primary that really gives us a better bellwether of what's happening in the Republican Party than anything else. And that's just right across the street from you. And I think it's Representative Massey. I think depending on, Donald Trump has put Massey in his sites, his social media sites. Massey doesn't wildly differ from voting with the president often. As a matter of fact, I took a look at him. He's 96% of the time with the president. But the rest of those times when he disagrees, man, he disagrees. And this has brought ire out. I don't know if you saw this, but Trump is now significantly supporting his primary candidate. And we've got national stories on that. I think that'll end up being not a national bellwether question, but I think it's going to certainly be a Republican defining moment. What happens with Massey in Kentucky?
I think Massey's going to be fine because I think that, as time goes on for Donald Trump, more and more people realize that he's going to lose just naturally a second-term president, lose a lot of his grasp on power, and he's going to be more and more erratic as he does so. And I think smart Republicans, and there are plenty of smart Republicans who are concerned about their own personal futures and the future of their party and things they care about, are going to realize that this increasingly erratic authoritarian guy is not the way for them to gain, consolidate, keep power.
Yeah, I concur. Well, Mike, I think we should move to our next story. Well, because we're getting there. We're talking about the midterm election.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. So this starts back in late January, on January 28th, when FBI agents executed a search warrant in Fulton County, Georgia. They seized ballots, election results from the 2020 presidential election. And this is part of that criminal investigation they're doing related to potential vote fraud and voting record destruction. Now, this week, Fulton County officials filed suit seeking the return of those seized materials. And also this week, President Trump called for the federal government to take over voting. He said on Dan Bongino's podcast, his former deputy FBI director, we should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting. And this wasn't some one-off comment by Trump in, an unguarded kind of moment. I mean, there was a bill signing this week in the Oval Office, a bunch of Republican legislators behind him. He said, if a state can't run an election, I think the people behind me should do something about it. Because, if you think about it, the state is an agent for the federal government in elections. I don't know why the federal government doesn't do them anyway. Now, Republicans in Congress, I think, have mostly chosen to interpret Trump's remarks here as a call for more election security rather than actual federal takeover of elections. And what they've been mentioning a lot is something called the SAVE Act, Safeguard American Voter Eligibility, and that calls for documentary proof of U.S. citizenship when registering to vote. At least that's the main thing it calls for. And a lot of Republicans, I think, see this as a common sense voting integrity safeguard. Well, a lot of Democrats, I think, clearly see this as just a way to make voting more difficult for eligible citizens who don't, have ready access to a passport or a birth certificate. And I think in general, we're seeing this last week a growing concern on the left, and I would say even among a number of centrists, that the Trump administration is going to try whatever it can to suppress likely Democratic voters in the 2028 midterms using some combination of election security and immigration enforcement as a pretext, basically. So what's your take on, the remarks that Trump has made and the FBI action here? And I didn't even mention Tulsi Gabbard weirdly being involved with this whole thing.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I mean, two things that Ken and I have actually talked about on these fronts before. One, Article 1, Section 4 of the Constitution is what we're talking about here. And one of the things that has come out, well, this is all a state issue. And yes, by default, states are the ones that are empowered by the Constitution. But Section 4 of the Constitution clearly states that actually Congress can override it. What it actually says is, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations, except as to the places of choosing senators. So I think Democrats have to be a little bit careful here. This language of, this is all state stuff. It's like, guys, hello. I mean, you could have been a Federalist a long time ago if you really wanted to be. But let's be honest, the Constitution is relatively clear. That doesn't mean I'm on the same page with Donald Trump that I want to see elections nationalized. That's a terrible plan. But of all of the kind of the ideas that Trump has floated forward, with which I disagree, this probably has some of the most constitutional backing, in the sense of, you want to make some changes, Congress can absolutely do that. If you don't think that, I would like to introduce you to the Civil Rights Act. So again, which is an important piece of legislation that changed the way that states can run their elections. Now, as for the SAVE, this is another one where Ken and we've talked about this before, and we actually had some significant disagreements. So I'm curious what you think about this as well, Mike. I am more open to the idea of needing IDs to vote, right? I think it's low hanging fruit. Now, Ken made a really good point. He's like, look, it's going to make a barrier for some individuals, and yes, I have thought about that carefully, and he's right. However, this is the same basic requirements that we have for having a license or a state ID. So it seems really hard for me. Now, there's other parts of the SAVE Act that could be problematic, but staking your flag on the, you've got to have an ID, because again, you're not going to have an ID today under the Real ID without a birth certificate anyway. Yeah. So I don't know. It just seems like, unlike what we were talking about before with ICE, neither of these seem like winning issues if I'm a Democrat. And again, let's be honest, I think some of the language that has been used in regard to the elections clause has just been wrong.
Well, let me ask you this, Trey. You know, of course, that sometimes banks are robbed, right? I mean, it happens, right?
Yeah.
So because we would like to have bank robberies be at zero, right? It would be nice if no bank was ever robbed. We could all agree that would be a fantastic public policy sort of goal. So then it would certainly really move us toward that goal if every time someone entered a bank, they had to be subject to a full body cavity search. Are you okay with the bank entry body cavity? No, here's my point. So I understand the argument. Well, we don't want illegal. We don't illegal immigrants, undocumented folks voting. Fair enough. Okay, let's look at the evidence. The Heritage Foundation, which is a MAGA, not even MAGA adjacent at this point, right? They have this election crimes database they've been keeping for a while. In the period of between 2003 and 2023, out of over 1 billion total votes cast, there were 24 instances they found of non-citizens voting. Okay, now, 24 out of 1 billion. Okay, now, if you say, well, wait a second, those are only cases where someone was identified and there was a case. Fair enough. So let's say, okay, well, what about, how do we know that then? Well, a number of states in the wake of 2020 have reviewed their entire voter rolls to make sure that they matched up, not non-citizens eligible. Here's what they found. Utah, hardly a Democratic woke stronghold, right? Out of 2.1 million registered voters, they found one non-citizen voter. One. Idaho found 36 very likely but not confirmed registered non-citizen voters out of roughly 1 million registered voters, but not all of them actually voted. And then Louisiana, another example, 79 non-citizen voters in at least one election, but this is kind of important. This goes back to elections since the 1980s. So what I'm saying here is this is you're more likely to be struck by lightning twice probably on the way to the polls. This is a solution for a problem that does not exist. And the reason why it is being proposed, it has nothing to do with election integrity, election security. There are things that there are legitimate issues about that, but they have nothing to do with non-citizens voting. This is a way to freak out folks who are not just non-citizens, but people who know folks in their families, or maybe, well, geez, I don't know, because voting, Trey, is kind of a low reward sort of thing. I mean, your vote's not going to make a heck of a lot of a difference, right? And if you can increase the friction, the fear, just a little bit among certain populations that, oh, by the way, happen to probably be predisposed to voting for Democrats, well, you can suppress that turnout. And that's exactly what's going on. This is a sham. This is a scam. This is exactly what it seems like.
LifeLock, how can I help?
The IRS said I filed my return.
But I haven't.
1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has paid the price of identity fraud.
What do I do?
My refund, though.
I'm freaking out.
Don't worry, I can fix this.
LifeLock fixes identity theft guaranteed and gets your money back with up to $3 million in coverage.
I'm so relieved.
No problem. I'll be with you every step of the way.
1 in 4 was a fraud-paying American. Not anymore. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Well, look, I don't disagree with you. I mean, the evidence is clear that when you have any kind of friction increase, it deters Democrats more than it deters Republican voters, right? I mean, what's the old saying? You know, Republicans pray for the rain because it makes their turnout better. I did not know those particular numbers, but they don't shock me. I think, especially when we're talking about, immigrants or undocumented people as voting, they're not going to be putting themselves into situations in which they're going to be identified, right? Why would one do that? So again, that doesn't shock me. But then again, there's an issue where if we got too far on that one, Mike, I think I'd outflank you on the left again because,
maybe
I'd want them all here anyway.
Well, yeah. But I mean, you combine that with Steve Bannon on his podcast this last week saying we're going to have ICE surround the polls come November. And then you have the White House press secretary saying, well, I can't guarantee that an ICE agent won't be around the polling location. And what that does, right, it creates a credible threat to voters. And that's more than enough to intimidate plenty of citizen voters, especially folks who are saying, will I be stopped and questioned about a relative or a friend or something? Or maybe, and this is certainly not a crazy thing, will I be profiled, taken into custody, and not necessarily being given the opportunity to speak to attorney or those other things that people in Minneapolis are rightly concerned about. This is a big deal. And, you could say, well, there's a law against that. Yeah. According to U.S. code, you can't have federal troops or armed men at the polls unless they're necessary to repel armed enemies of the United States. But
there could be armed enemies around any
But
corner.
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if that law is violated because Donald Trump has demonstrated in the past that he is more than happy to issue blanket pardons for people who violate laws, which he did on January 6th. So this has no real effect. Federal law doesn't matter if the president is willing to pardon people en masse who violate federal law if it is to advance his ends. That's why I said this is a lawless administration. And as long as Donald Trump has the pardon power, federal law doesn't matter.
Okay, I feel like I'm talking with two different mics. Where was this mic, 10 minutes ago when we were chatting about ICE? I'm on board with that, right? You're absolutely right. The threats and the suggestion that ICE officers are going to be around the polling places, that's a huge problem. But you're not going to fix it fighting over the stupid mega bill. You're going to fight it, like we talked about a minute ago, by attempting to hold ICE more accountable, by saying we're going to hold the line firm on things like not having those masks so that maybe, just maybe, individuals, even if there aren't immediate repercussions, might not be willing to execute those kinds of orders. So I like this, Mike. I'm with you.
Well, see, no,
where was this mic 30 seconds ago?
The difference is, Trey,
you pass this bill or not
you're...
pass this bill, it doesn't matter because they're gonna do what they're gonna do unless you try to push some borders on them.
Well, I guess maybe the difference, Trey, is that I am no longer actively an academic, and you are in your Oklahoma-based ivory tower, and I have come down, and I live in the real world at this point now. And the real world is a world of what can we achieve? And so when we're talking about negotiations about about funding DHS, well, there are things both sides are going to have to compromise on. And if you put a complete purity test, either all 10 of these things, or we're going to shut it all down, that's going to end up, I think, costing Democrats in the midterms. And to me, I'm keeping my eyes on that bigger prize of what we need to do, not because I don't identify as a Democrat anymore, but what Americans who give a damn about the rule of law need to do to try to push back against this travesty of a president when it comes to rule of law. So,
well, let's come down into the real world with you. I like that. So let's think about this. So let's assume that you're correct, that the mega bill is the line in the sand that we need to draw. That's the place that we're going to do it. And let's say that's exactly what happens. Let's assume that it doesn't get passed, which I think is really likely anyway, since there's no way that Republicans are going to get around a Democratic filibuster in the Senate, right? That is not going to happen. And again, there's no universe in which the Republicans are going to decide to use the nuclear option and blow up the filibuster to say get the mega bill through. So we win on that front. We don't have the Save America Act. We don't get those documentary proofs forward. But your second argument there is spot on. So if that's all you get, and the concern is the midterms, and you're concerned that the Trump administration is in fact going to be willing to go that next level and in fact do what individuals have suggested, which is to put ICE individuals, as Bannon mentioned, right, as you rightfully mentioned, as Bannon mentions, put ICE officials around election polls. Well, how do you win the midterms then, friend? Like,
Well, yeah.
I mean, so my question then becomes doesn't that, again, in the trenches reality of things mean that you've already suggested that you can't win the midterms if the Trump administration is willing to surround Democratic polling locations with ICE officials?
And
so
I
haven't
think,
you lost at the outset? Because at the last story you were saying the only way to do it is the midterms, and here now you're saying it's not going to happen because ICE is going to be there.
No,
and I don't
I'm
necessarily
saying I don't
disagree,
think they're actually necessarily going to be there, but I think the threat of them being the credible threat of them being there is going to be enough potentially to suppress turnout to the point where in enough swing districts it certainly won't hurt Republicans and it could help them. So, I mean, that's a fundamental issue with any agreement between the administration and Democrats about any kind of ICE reforms. They could just say, well, you know what, we're just going to ignore this agreement that we made. And what are you going to do about it if there's no accountability? And that's one of our listeners, Urgicles on Discord wrote in, how seriously do you take these warnings of people like David French, who's a conservative columnist, who's sort of one of the, I guess, pet conservatives at the New York Times, but he's not a liberal guy at all.
No.
He painted this scenario in a column this week, where around midterms, ICE starts conducting large-scale operations in Democratic cities, right? Starting sweeping up, including, non-white lawful residents, as well as folks in the country illegally, which we've seen in Minneapolis as well, right? And so then, of course, non-whites understandably stay away from polling places because, hey, we've heard the rumors they're going to be there on Election Day. And court orders don't do anything if ICE ignores them. As I pointed out, they repeatedly have in Minneapolis. And so at the same time, then we get FBI raids on election offices in multiple Democratic cities, perhaps, focused on swing districts and states, and red state officials start to move to take control of election administration, which mostly happens at the county level. You put all that together and it freaks people out just enough to potentially tilt things toward the Republicans here in the midterms. And it seems crystal clear to me that Donald Trump is desperate to avoid Democrats controlling Congress, either chamber of Congress in the midterms. And now there's actually been some talk in the last week from some Republicans saying, you know what, we thought the Senate was a lock, but now we're starting to wonder. And I think that would put the pressure even more on the Trump administration to say, what can we do to suppress the hell out of Democratic turnout? And I think they're going to do it, and they're at least going to attempt it. And there aren't any good answers about that, I don't think.
Well, I mean, I think your empirical response there about, what could be up for grabs is certainly something that even those of us in our low ivory towers of Oklahoma might be looking at in the wake of the Texas election, right? Which even more narrowed the House. Let's see if I'm recalling what I had up there, right? This is a seat that Donald Trump won by 17-ish%, and it flips Democrat. There were not many people in any kind of electoral orbit that thought that was highly possible. Here it is and happening. Now, again, my comments a minute ago continue to say this is a special election. It wasn't, it's a weird time of the year. You got to be a little bit cautious about that. However, in a seat like Texas, you would assume that being a harder election would actually have favored Republicans as opposed to Democrats. So, that is an excellent point you have there. But I think that's something that goes back to broader people, and then we need to move on to our next story. I think kind of hanging behind the midterm questions for some is what happens next. Trump continues to, let's call it tease for now, right? He continues to tease, poke, float the idea that there could be more Trump, right? I don't think that's uber likely, but you right here suggest something true, which is, does the very act of using that language change what is happening? What is your thought on that before we move on to Epstein?
Well, I would be stunned if there's even a credible, third term Trump sort of thing. But to me, again, focusing on the midterms, it doesn't have to be, he doesn't have to do these things. It's just a matter of threatening them or kind of surrounded. It's certainly within his authority to surge ICE in various areas. And if that would make sense as a strategy right before the midterms to create that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, I would be surprised actually if it didn't happen before to a certain extent, because I think he's scared to death of Democrats controlling the House, knows what that would do to his ability to just run roughshod like he has in the last couple of years. He's experienced what it's like to run things when Democrats are control of Congress, and when Republicans are, and he likes it a lot better when Republicans are in charge of things, even, it's scary times.
Well, who doesn't like unified government though when you're the president, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's fair.
Hey, Trey.
Well,
before we do move on, just a really quick message here from one of our sponsors today. I tend to go with my gut on a lot of things, but when my gut is off, really everything kind of feels off. My digestion, energy, mood, even my focus. And, every day your gut's fighting this silent war against processed foods, stress, even, toxins in the air. And when your gut struggles, your whole body feels it. And most probiotics never actually even make it to your gut alive, which is why they don't work. But Just Thrive, clinically proven to arrive 100% alive and deliver measurable results. Just Thrive turns your gut into an antioxidant factory, creating protective compounds exactly where you need them most. That means benefits like better digestion, healthy immunity, more energy, easier weight management. And Just Thrive probiotic comes in capsules or berry-flavored gummies, so there's an option for everyone in the family. And for over a decade, Just Thrive has been helping thousands of people take control of their health with science-backed solutions you can trust. From their award-winning probiotic to their full line of gut, immune, and brain health supplements, Just Thrive is ready to help you live your healthiest life. And you can try Just Thrive probiotic for 90 days risk-free. You can save 20% on your first order with code CX. And see the difference for yourself, or get a full product refund, no questions asked. Take the 90-day Just Thrive probiotic challenge today at justthrivehealth.com/CX. Be the best you with Just Thrive.
Well, let's move on to Epstein, Mike. This is, I'm going to be honest. I told this to Ken and Justin a couple of times now. If I have to think about Epstein anymore, I'm just going to want to throw myself off the next cliff I hike.
Oh, God, yeah.
But here we are. And don't get me wrong. It's not that I want to pretend like there was nothing terrible going on. But at some point, how many times we got to talk about the terrible things that were going on? But here we are. Let's talk about it for a second, because we did have the most recent dump. So on January 30, the Department of Justice released the last list of its records, or at least the last of its records it's going to be willing to release in response to the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was passed in the House and signed into law by President Trump at the end of 2025. There are still 2.5 million pages being withheld by Attorney General Pam Bondi, and she has now told lawmakers that those will remain private, citing both victim privacy and ongoing investigation integrity. Now, the current released set is actually nearly 3.5 million documents, not pages, but documents, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images, which are coming from a collection of FBI, police, Florida investigators over the course of the last 20 years. Thomas Massey, we mentioned him earlier, he's been vocal in this only being a, quote, partial compliance, end quote. Now, as of this weekend, sources are indicating from routers and others that congresspersons in the House will be able to review the unredacted versions of the Justice Department files. Again, though, this does not include the aforementioned pages withheld by the Attorney General. Now, part of the reason for this controversy is that some of the documents not being released seem to actually relate to the actions of Bondi, Blanche, and Patel, or at least that is seemingly an accusation on the basis of what seems to be missing. Man, there's a lot of maybes, but there we go. The files released so far are so overwhelming. Listen, usually when we prepare for this show and I prepare this show, I try to read or look at all the stuff. I'm going to be honest with you listeners. I did not see any of it. I mean, not any of it, but none of it that matters in that sense. And that's because there's just too much to do that. As a number of people have mentioned, it will take real individual investigative journalists years to piece together everything that's happening here. And it will continue to be a source of conspiracy theorists for years because there's just so much being released. Some of it matters and much of it does not. And that's just information overload. The biggest things that we have coming from this trench that we can talk about, I actually don't relate to the United States, but the United Kingdom, where former Prince Andrew is seen in one picture over all fours, over a woman, and where Epstein offered to set him up with yet another 26-year-old Russian. And following this release, King Charles has stripped him of his remaining titles and evicted him from the Royal Lodge. Listen, for those of us who aren't Brits, that doesn't seem like a big deal. It's a big deal, but there you go, friends. We got rid of the monarchy a long time ago. We'll let the United Kingdom figure that out. Now, the British press is really kind of exploring this in a bigger deal because it's kind of striking at the heart of the monarchy. But I would say that's kind of tangential to what we're covering here on the politics, guys. So focusing back on the United States, prominent figures included in this tranche is Elon Musk, who discussed visiting Little St. James, which Musk has denied, but some really interesting email conversations going back and forth between Epstein and Musk. Even more so is Steve Bannon, who back in 2019, that's during the Trump administration, got an Apple Watch as a Christmas gift from Epstein as a part of their Christmas exchange. Not exactly who you want on your Christmas list exchange, but here we are. Bill Gates was also mentioned. However, be cautious about this, friends. If you look at that, most of the emails related to Bill are actually in relation to Epstein sending himself emails talking about what he's going to do to Bill because I have things. But of course, Epstein that's weird and it's not really to Bill. So be thoughtful about that when you see this running around. The other big fight that we're going to have to talk about here a little bit, Mike, of course, is the fight between the Clintons and Congress. I feel like it's the 90s again. I don't know. But Clinton has argued that she wants a public fight about the issue, but even Democrats want Hillary and Bill to testify before the House. And just a few months shy of his 80th birthday, it looks like Bill Clinton will, in fact, be appearing before the House to avoid a contempt of Congress. Whew. So there is the short version of, $3.5 million documents, 2,000 videos, and 108,000 video images. Mike, which five did you look at? No.
Well, yeah, you put a lot out there in that opening, Trey, and obviously we can't get to all of it in any sort of detail, but I guess my main takeaway is that while I disagree with Marjorie Taylor Greene and the non-Trump populist right, I guess, or the populist right on a lot of things, I think they're right about this. I think they're understandably worked up because there's the populist narrative that I think in this case is sort of demonstrative of elite impunity, institutions and the powerful who run them lying and covering up to take care of each other. I think you could say this is a great example of institutional and personal corruption at the very highest levels. And we see it again and again and again. And so I think people Should be. I guess I'm not as mad about it because I recognize that that's kind of how things have worked at forever. Essentially, the rich are different from the rest of us. They do largely play by their own rules. They do largely cover for each other, at least in a lot of ways. And all sorts of people and institutions, even ones that we kind of like, even us, even if you're on the left, well, you look really hard for reasons to ignore or to downplay even enormous moral failings on the part of the rich and powerful in return for money, in return for access and that sort of. And this isn't a partisan thing. Sucking up the rich people is bipartisan, right? I mean, and sure, the Republicans now are trying to implicate the Clintons with the ridiculous, well, they should testify because, and the Clintons are right, this serves no legitimate legislative purpose. It's to embarrass the Clintons and make it a Democrat scandal. But no, this is about people sucking up to the rich and powerful to get things from them and not really giving too much of a damn, even if they're just horrifically awful human beings. And so it's disgusting, it's awful, it's horrific, but this is how, sadly, things are even in democracies.
I think you make some excellent points there, Mike, but part of what I think makes this difficult is that we want to have heroes and we want to have kind of perfect people. And I think Elon Musk is a great example of this. He was a hero of the left, then he was a hero of the right, and now he's a hero of nobody. And I think it kind of shows that arc, right? He's going to change the world with an electric car. And so, of course, he has to be this great person, says the left. And then he's the genius who's going to cut all of the government spending and figure it out and have efficiency happen. And he's a hero of the right. And let's be honest, it's the same Elon Musk who, if you've ever read any even just recent biographies on him, was never a particularly great guy in a lot of ways. Was he smart on a few things? Absolutely. And if you want to do some math, if you want to build a rocket, he surely knew how to do that, but sometimes cut some corners and maybe hurt some people in the process. And again, I think that comes back to a political view in the world, Mike, where we are desperate for heroes. We're desperate for that kind of movie imagery where we're going to have good guys, bad guys, and there's not that many people in between. In reality, there's people whom we align with there might be things that we have overlapping interests. We got to be careful that they don't become, or we don't idolize them in a way that I think is unhealthy, but it happens in democracy frequently.
Yeah, I think just in general, the sort of personality characteristics that allow or that make it possible for people to rise to the very top in almost any field of endeavor, particularly in politics, is a certain amount of narcissism and willingness to step on other people, to break some eggs, to make that omelet. And it's, I guess I would say it's not necessarily because people are evil, though there are some evil people. I think it's easy to rationalize this. You say things like, you know what? Well, I'll do this thing. I'll take this dirty money. I'll use this bad person for access, for advancement, because that way I'll be able to do good things. I'm just playing the game because, oh, by the way, if I don't take advantage of this, some person less decent than I am will, and the world will be where, I mean, you hear that argument from people who are, dealing drugs, saying like, yeah, but I'm one of the better drug dealers, not like the really bad ones. People have a great ability to rationalize self-serving sort of horrific acts, even at the most ridiculous level. And of course, then there are some people, I'm convinced, there's this allure of the illicit, allure of the transgressive. And so, sex parties on the island with Epstein, and maybe some of the girls are a little on the young side. Rich people, I don't think it's hard for us to understand how different some rich people are when you've bought almost all the legal stuff you can with your money. And it's like, this kind of sense of ennui, I would imagine. It's like, well, what else can I do? What other boundaries can I push? Well, Sex Island with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, it's warped. It's fundamentally messed up, but clearly it's a thing.
No, I don't disagree. And I'll make one last point for us before we wrap things up, Mike. And that is, this is where I feel some of the most deepest importance that we get wrong about Christianity and the teachings of Jesus, right? The people who are going to be the most important in many ways are not the ones that we're going to see, because they've humbled themselves in interesting ways. Like, they don't show up. And so you're right about that. The people who rise to the top are kind of doing the opposite of what we would hope the best people to do. And there is a bit of that kind of built into the democratic system, right? Because you have to be willing to put please be careful. I'm not suggesting that everybody who's run for office is some horrendous human being. There are individuals who I've known, that I've worked with, that I think are really good human beings who have also been, but there is a tension there. There is an obvious tension, and it's the same tension about people who rise up. You're talking about it as you get more wealth, instead of thinking about it the right way, which is to suggest, how can I put other things first? We end up putting ourselves first. This is a really interesting book. Do you remember? It was a social science book called The Heart of Altruism. It was kind of a case example of qualitative research. And one of its findings, which is unique, is that the more wealthy you are, the less likely you are to attribute altruistic behavior. And I mean, it is interesting to have a deep social science work that maybe almost confirms what Jesus teach, which was, hey, look, you think you've done all my commands? Well, the next thing you need to do is you need to give up all your fabulous wealth so that you can really follow me. And then the rich young ruler goes away really sad because he doesn't want to give it all up. And I think we see that happening here. And you're pointing that out, because once you have all of that, you have that tendency to want to push those boundaries. You think of yourself as being the reason for it all. And, well, I deserve a little side island time, or however you put that. But there we go, friend. Any last thoughts you have?
No, I should point out that I think there are some legitimate privacy concerns. I mean, the Wall Street Journal did an investigation of what had been released, and I think they found 40-something instances of fairly clear privacy violations. And so I don't think this is necessarily a full-on cover-up, though I think certainly I would not be surprised if, people in Justice Department just conveniently did not, release things that made themselves look bad. But this is not an easy thing to do. I looked over enough of the documents to think like, wow, this is such an incredibly deep document dump. I mean, because I just did some, it's a searchable database, and I was curious about a few names here and there, and just the volume of emails and things that were pulled up, it's staggering, the amount that you have to go through. And I think you're right. It's going to take literally years, even with the assistance of some pretty good AI, to kind of get the sense of what's really going on behind the scenes here.
Well, and we also learned some of the weird ways that people send emails.
Yeah.
The content, which again, I suppose goes back to that point, which is, who would email about some of this stuff? Like, even at my level, sometimes I think, is that something we ought to email about or not? But
But again, I think it goes to that idea of feeling, if you feel for long enough that the rules don't really apply to you, then you tend to get a little sloppy about that stuff because you're different from the unwashed rabble of society.
Well, that is fair. But I think probably on that point, Mike, we should bring the weekend show to a close. We've got a lot coming in for our supporters exclusive midweek show. So we're going to be talking about the things we didn't get in the show. We've got fun recommendations. Things are going to be coming up. I also going to remind everybody that one of the things that I have been doing with Justin and with Ken has been mini series for our Wednesday supporters exclusive shows. And additionally, one of those series that we got through with over the last 3 years, our Constitution show, we're releasing on Wednesdays free to you. So maybe get a taste of that, see what you think about those miniseries, and then come join us for the midweek exclusive shows. So if you want to get a hold of those, it's really easy to do. You can do it in a couple different ways. You can head to politicsguys.com/support. You can head to patreon.com/politicsguys. Or if you're really old school, you can always just head to the show, scroll down to the show notes, and just click through. But I'm an old man. We were talking about that before. What do I know? Now, Now, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can always reach us at mail@politicsguys.com. Also, we both recognize we are not part of the rich and famous. We haven't made it to that juncture yet. And so maybe you'd like to have access to that supporters exclusive show, but you're not in a financial position to support the Politics Guys. Please reach out to us at mail@politicsguys.com so we can work something out. We would love to have you reach out to us. No matter who you are, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. It sounds like terrible, but we need the algorithms to make the Politics Guys go higher. And so if you've appreciated it, do that. And sharing episodes is the best way that you can make that happen. I also want to end, as I always do, with the incredible individuals who give so much support to the Politics Guys, and they are our executive producers. They are Wilma Marino, Daniel Toe, Ryan Beasley, Don Oglesby, Derek Schmidt, Dakota Heath, Jason Chrysler, Dave Dean, Jeremy Larson, Brian Matza, and Jody Miller. We'll see you this week.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.